we're finally starting to get an idea of the economic impact of the coronavirus pandemic. According to Stats Canada, the country's economy shrank by 5.4% last year. That made 2020 the worst year for the country's economic output since record-keeping began. The drop was due to the shutdown of large parts of the economy during the first wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. But since bottoming out last spring and summer, economic activity has slowly and steadily bounced back, thanks in part to a big rebound in the resource and manufacturing sectors, as well as the red-hot housing market. Well, despite the economic hardships Canadians endured last year, some people did manage to launch new businesses. In fact, in the 10 months leading up to January 31st of this year, an online business service called Owner registered 16,000 new Canadian businesses on its platform. Overall, Owner saw a 67% increase in registrations last year compared to 2019. Owner's co-founder attributes the growth to more opportunity in e-commerce, increased demand for healthcare products, and laid-off employees starting new businesses. Well, some small hospitality businesses who opened their doors during the pandemic are now petitioning Ottawa. That's because they're not eligible for government pandemic support. To qualify, they needed to have seen a drop in revenue from 2019 to 2020. I'm joined now by Scarlet Osborne. She's the owner of El Segundo restaurant in Sechelt, BC, and she's the one who started this petition. Hi, thanks so much for being with us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So, first of all, I want to go back a little bit. Did you decide to open your business during the pandemic, or was this something that was in the works when the pandemic hit?
That's right, the second one. We're restaurants, as anyone in hospitality knows, take a really substantial amount of planning. There's a lot of permissions that come on board with it. So it takes a long time in advance of getting open. So we, in particular, we'd signed our lease back in February of 2019. We'd already spent well in excess of $200,000 prior to the pandemic hitting. And we were legally and financially completely committed to the project prior to the pandemic even being a thing.
So what's it been like opening during a pandemic and running a business during a pandemic, especially with some of the restrictions that have been in place?
Yeah, it's been pretty tough. The first piece, you know, the initial panic, I think we all as Canadians shared in that panic initially, what's going to happen and during those first shutdowns. But then what that ended up doing to us in particular was shutting down the speed with which we were going through our renovation process. So instead of opening in April of 2020, we ended up eventually, due to all of those slowdowns, not opening until late July. And initially, that didn't seem so bad, and we got open for the summer. And as we know, a lot of the restrictions were a lot more relaxed through the summer. So we had a great summer and felt really good about it.
So as we heard there, you don't qualify for some of the federal funding because you didn't have 2019 revenue to compare, even though you started a lease, you'd already had expenses in 2019. So you started this petition. What are you asking Ottawa for specifically?
We're asking specifically for Ottawa to address the eligibility criteria to include new businesses that can demonstrate that they were fully committed legally and financially prior to the pandemic. So it's not just restaurants, although restaurants are a really great example because of the amount of planning that go in. But I sort of formed a group of us here in BC that are all in the same position. And we're primarily restaurant cafes with a few things like fitness studios where there was a lot of planning and investment. And the other big gap in the current wage subsidy program is that if you expanded your business over that same period, so therefore you have increased revenue, but you also have much higher increased costs, you're also excluded from that. And both of those are huge flaws. I mean, I think it's fair to say that everyone is aware that hospitality is a highly affected sector. The government has acknowledged that through their highly affected sectors program. And most people are aware that is one of the hardest hit industries. So it seems inequitable where we were just as committed as everybody else. And the only thing holding us back from getting these subsidies is the basis for comparison, which is looking at last year.
Right. So you are making a distinction between those businesses who, you know, maybe someone was laid off and they suddenly decided to start a business in 2020 versus people who had financial commitments. So what, are there any financial assistance programs that you are eligible for?
Yeah, well, a great example of what we're asking from the government is to look at the way that they did the CEBA program, which was essentially the $40,000 loan with 10 forgivable. And then when they created that, they created a side program called the RRRF, which is a Rural Relief Fund. And it was exactly the same program, except it was administered by community futures groups across the country, meaning that they were able to apply a case-by-case basis sense of analyzing the business and assessing the business's viability and why it is that they aren't eligible normally for the CBA. And so we were eligible for that, and it was a great help. But that $40,000 and the 20 that have come since alongside the CBA program covered only the losses that we sustained due to the 5 months that our opening was delayed. They didn't even touch the losses and overheads that we're running through this winter with all the extra restrictions.
Why do you think it's important for the government to support small business in this way? Do you worry about the future of local business? I mean, I certainly look around my neighborhood, and even before the pandemic, there were mom and pop shops closing and being taken over by franchise big business. Do you worry after this pandemic about the future of small local Canadian businesses?
I really do, and I think that it's something that we should all be worried about. The supports that the government have given, like things like the wage subsidy, were really well crafted in supporting 99% of businesses. And I think we should all, as Canadians, be proud that we had such a program. And that's why we're just asking for this touch of adjustment to the way that businesses are eligible. But as for small business, the one, I'm a bit of an optimist. And the one thing that I was just so thrilled to see over Christmas in particular was the real focus on buying local and supporting local businesses. The amount of gift cards that we sold at Christmas was overwhelming in a really positive way. So I think that Canadians know that that's what we should be doing, is supporting small business. And I think that they understand and demonstrated that through Christmas. And I hope that we can all band together and continue to do that, to support our local businesses wherever we are.
All right, Scarlet Osborne is the owner of El Segundo restaurant in Sechelt, BC, and she started a petition to get the government to allow new businesses like hers to access federal funding. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.